Jess Newman is the Senior Director of Agriculture and Sustainability at McCain Foods, the world's largest manufacturer of frozen French fries and appetizers. Jess's team of agronomists, and I didn't know what agronomist meant, so I looked it up. According to AI, agronomists are specialized scientists focusing on crop production, soil management, and sustainable agricultural practices to improve food, feed, and fiber production. So Jess's team of agronomists and field reps manage McCain's relationships with more than 350 American and Canadian farmers. They also implement McCain's 2026 sustainability goals related to agriculture, which sounds like another fascinating presentation for another night, and I mean that. Jess holds a BA from Harvard, an MPA from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management with a sustainability certificate. She's worked for the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the Ecologic Institute, Booz and Company, CGIAR, another thing I had to look up. It's the world's largest publicly funded agri-food partnership, Anheuser-Busch, and the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability. Talk about a municipal sustainability plan. Until just recently, Jess was the chair of the Environmental Sustainability Commission in Birmingham. Then her husband was elected to the city council, so she can't quite be in that role anymore, but she's still involved. And I'm proud to say that Jess is a member of my church, Birmingham Unitarian Church, and has had a major impact there as well. Shout out to all the Birmingham Unitarian Church folks who are here tonight. Jess, take it away.
Right. Thank you all so much for having me. The Sierra Club is an amazing organization and I've been meaning to get involved for a long time. So I was so pleased and happy when Jane asked me to speak. So let me share my screen here. That was a beautiful introduction, so I will not add much more other than to say that I am a proud member of Birmingham Unitarian Church. There's some pictures of my family up here, and this is my slide I use at work, which is why my favorite French fries listed there, because it's kind of something we do. But my family and I live in Birmingham, which is relevant to this presentation in the sense that I'm going to talk about my experience in Birmingham's Environmental Sustainability Committee. I think we've heard enough about me, but I did want to touch on the fact that I am speaking today in my capacity as a private citizen who used to be on Birmingham's Sustainability Board and used to chair it. But when my husband Kevin Kozlowski was elected to the commission, which again many of the people on this call were incredibly helpful in making happen, I had to step down because Birmingham has clear rules about spouses serving on appointed committees. So the work of Birmingham's Permanent Environmental Sustainability Committee continues and is robust and awesome. But I am now more of a cheerleader from the side versus someone who is actively supporting. So I was thinking of kind of my purpose for this presentation, and I think I want to share what my experience was in sustainability policy at the local level, and hopefully by doing so, empower others to get involved. And one question I did have was whether anyone on the call has served on any sort of city or municipal board before, even if it's not on sustainability. Has anyone had that experience? Couple hands. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Good to know. So I think just a couple group agreements for the session. Obviously, be present and engaged. All viewpoints are welcome. Have fun, and all questions are welcome. And I welcome questions throughout because I don't want us to ask the question when it's relevant. So jump right in, just come right off mute or put up your hand, and I'm happy to answer any question at any time. Okay, so what I'm going to cover, what are sustainability boards, committees, commissions? What was my experience in Birmingham and what was the work that we developed? And kind of reflecting back on that experience, what were my key takeaways and advice for others to get involved? And then, time permitting, we can do more questions or discussion at the end. So starting at the basics, part of why Kevin and I, when we moved back to Michigan, we were high school sweethearts, my husband and I. We grew up in Rochester Hills. When both of our jobs went remote during COVID, after almost a decade of being professional nomads, we had to figure out where we wanted to live. And we looked at a lot of places in Michigan. We knew we wanted to go home and be near family. We looked hard at Ann Arbor, but ultimately we ended up choosing Birmingham. because of its walkability. And Birmingham City motto is a walkable community. And we knew that when we had kind of stopped being Rolling Stones and come home, we wanted to get more involved in the place where we lived and helping to shape it and influence it. But we had no idea when we moved home just the scope and of opportunities for folks to get involved in their city. So what are municipal boards? So they're usually quite specialized, often appointed bodies created by local governments to manage, advise on, or in some cases regulate certain areas of city activity. They generally bridge the gap between citizens and elected officials. And so if you Google kind of your own town and what city board opportunities they have, there's usually like 40 of them. There's quite a lot. And I just did a quick Google search on Birmingham where there is almost 40 different boards. I looked up Rochester, I looked up Royal Oak, I looked up Warren, I looked up Southfield. Every city has these appointed bodies where you can get involved, and in most cases, there are vacancies. So if you Google wherever you live right now, they will probably tell you which city boards have open spots, and you just got to show up, give a little bio about yourself, and usually they'll say, "Thank the Lord, welcome to the board." I did, rely on Chat GPT for a bit of the summary here, but some of the key aspects. So usually there's a very specific purpose. So there'll be the zoning appeals board or the water fee appeals board or the public arts board. In Birmingham, we have the cable board, we have the parks board. Usually there's a remit to advise on something specific, and the folks who are appointed to that board generally have some relevant expertise. Some boards in certain cities will ask for certain qualifications. So, hey, we want at least 2 people on the planning board. In most cities, the planning board is usually pretty important and has actual like regulatory and binding powers versus most sustainability committees and boards only have basically the right to advise, right? The city commission can and councils can take or leave that, but there are some that are more serious. And in certain cases, some cities may say, hey, we want 2 lawyers on that board, we want a real estate agent, and we want an architect. Right. So sometimes there'll be specific roles they're looking to fill on boards. In the sustainability boards that I was looking at, Birmingham's, for example, did ask for folks who had experience in electric vehicles, in waste, in electrification, in kind of different subject areas. But I looked at some other cities and it was pretty much free and open, whoever could be on the sustainability board. Right. So that composition, sometimes there's specifics, sometimes it's pretty wide open. Some boards have these like quasi-regulatory judicial kind of powers, if they're like an appeals board or an ethics board or a planning board. Most just advise. So that's kind of how a crash course in how a lot of city and municipal boards work. Jane, question?
Um, and this is wonderful. I'm really glad to hear this. One of my questions, maybe it's not the right time, is how does one of these get created? So how does it happen that there
Yeah.
needs to be a sustainability commission?
Yeah. So I think there's just 2 ways that could come to be. And I think one of my overarching lessons from this whole process is that you need champions, both in your elected officials in your city, so your city council, your city commission, and they can, for example, make a motion in a meeting that a certain board be established, right? And then city staff need to go execute that. The other way I think that it could happen is there could be kind of a citizen, request for something like that then, folks brought to their elected leaders and was eventually moved forward. But most city boards are formed by either city staff recommending to their elected officials that a board be formed, or the elected officials being the ones who bring that impetus. In the case of Birmingham, one of our commissioners, Katie Schaefer, was very passionate about this issue and urged the city to declare a climate emergency, and with one of the actions being a greenhouse gas inventory and the other one being forming an ad hoc board that would oversee the creation of a plan. So that was how it happened. In Birmingham, there was that champion amongst the elected officials. So when I looked kind of which cities in the Metro Detroit area have sustainability boards, councils, commissions, Birmingham, Dearborn. Detroit has an entire office, that very large city, right, has an entire office of sustainability as well as a green task force with advisory powers. Ferndale, Huntington Woods, Northville, Novi, Royal Oak. The Birmingham group has been in touch with some of the folks on the Royal Oak board, Sterling Heights, Troy, Ipsy, and this is just what ChatGPT could come up with, right? I'm sure there's a couple more than that, but a lot of these already exist. If there isn't one in your town, again, that is where you can figure out who on your council or commission whose values aligned with you, who this might be something that they want to suggest or bring as an agenda item to eventually be actioned. The other thing I would say is that, as a sustainability professional, someone who works as an education and sustainability, who lives it every day, sustainability is multidisciplinary. It may be that your town doesn't have a sustainability committee or that it's full with awesome people. Sustainability can be represented on basically any city committee. It would be hugely helpful to have someone who is passionate about sustainability on a planning committee, right? When you start to think about impervious surfaces, rainwater retention, what are the codes and ordinances that are guiding new buildings and their ability to mitigate their rainwater? Like, it would be awesome to have a sustainability advocate on planning boards. It would be obvious and incredible to have a sustainability advocate on a parks board. But pretty much any board that you could think of that would have an opening, you can bring your sustainability flavor and angle to it because sustainability shows up everywhere and is important everywhere. It doesn't just need to be on a sustainability board. So that would be another push I would give everybody. So that's kind of like City Boards 101. I didn't know any of that before I moved to Birmingham. And I tried to get on the Parks Board and I didn't get on. And then they formed the Sustainability Board. And I thought, okay, let me try again, right? So, like, if at first you don't succeed, right, keep trying. And wherever you show up, you can bring that sustainability mindset. So, I guess any more questions on like what city boards are, what sustainability committees are before we kind of move into the Birmingham experience? So, the Birmingham um, Sustainability Committee was an ad hoc committee. So this is the another thing that many cities will do, which is they will start an ad hoc committee that which generally means that there's a limited time span around it. Both cities have both permanent and ad hoc committees. So the city commission set one of its strategic goals as being, so Birmingham has three strategic goals, and the second one is environmental sustainability, which is awesome. That happened in November 22. In January 23, with the support and push from Katie Schaefer, one of the commissioners at the time, they declared a climate emergency, which is pretty freaking awesome, right? It makes me proud. The committee was seated in March of 2023, and the Sustainability Committee was the one committee they said where more people showed up and had energy and wanted to be on the board than actual seats. I remember halfway through that meeting when we were all being nominated, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get on this board. Like, I do this for a living, and I don't know if I'm going to get on this board. It was an amazing group of people. We had two objectives that we were tasked with in that climate emergency: doing a greenhouse gas inventory and building a sustainability and climate action plan. And we needed to do that basically within about like a year and change by September 2024. This is our awesome board. So one thing I will say, if folks have not served on a city board, is there's a thing called the Michigan Open Meetings Act, which means that basically any meeting of the board where there is quorum needs to be on the record, needs to be official. So you can only go out for drinks with less than a quorum of your friends from your board. So fun fact. Um, Two folks I want to point out here who are really important in this picture are the folks who are off either end. So Nick Dupuy, Birmingham's planning director, is on one side, and Leah Blazinski, another one of the planners, is on the other. When you serve on a city board, you get out what you put in, right? Like fundamentally, it is city staff who are doing the work, and you are advising and giving direction on that work. So another main takeaway I had from this experience was that having dedicated, passionate city staff folks who really care about and want to advance sustainability makes a huge difference. And we had that in Birmingham. So the role as dedicated city staff was important. We met once a month. The pre-read packet would be issued. You were not a very useful board member if you hadn't read that packet when you showed up to the meeting. It was always pretty clear who was trying to like read it on the fly as we were doing it. So I would say a key lesson here was like you get out what you put in, right? You elect generally a chair and a vice chair in these meetings. So I was elected the chair mostly because no one else wanted to do it. But I did find the facilitation of these meetings was important, right? And making sure that all voices were heard, that all expertise everyone was bringing to the table was heard was important. I would often assign homework, right? If I wanted people to read certain sections of the report that had been drafted. Hey, if this is the one about transportation, all right, I need my EV guys to read this section, right? If this is the one about composting and waste, I need our folks with expertise and materials to read that section, right? This is the one about impervious surface and green spaces. Hey, my board member who works at Friends of the Rouge, can you please read that section, right? So I did find that that was important, and it was my first time leading a group with Robert's Rules of Order in play, right? And so it was a very good learning. We also had two high school representatives from Groves and Seaholm that you can see in the picture here, which was a really cool way to involve them as well. So this was our Birmingham Green Healthy Climate Plan logo, and these are actual real pictures that we're taking in Birmingham. So a black-eyed Susan from a brown sweet bioswale, native maple trees in Linden Park, the Wallace Frost Historic Home, a solar panel that's on one of the carports for a local business, and then a native stag beetle. That beetle is actually sitting on the exterior wall of City Hall when that picture was taken. So we do appreciate the creativity in that. So what I'm going to start with first is the greenhouse gas inventory. So how did we go about doing that? So there's a national institution called IGLI who has a program that literally helps cities do a greenhouse gas inventory. So they have a protocol. They ask you which data to collect. We go through the process of that data collection, and then they help us run all of that data through their systems and ultimately come out with a greenhouse gas inventory. So what you're looking at here are Birmingham's community-wide greenhouse gas emissions as of last year. And I imagine this would look very similar to a number of cities in Michigan, but what this tells you is that residential energy use is our largest chunk. And I think that was an interesting thing to have on our radars right off the bat, because ultimately that requires like so there's some amount of residential energy greening that will come from the grid, right? From the grid getting greener and all the commitments that the state has made around that. But at the end of the day, this is about energy efficiency improvements in individual homes, reducing energy use in individual homes, making sure that when new homes are being built, which in Birmingham they are quite often, that we have stricter codes and regulations around that as well. So right off the bat, there's a clear need to engage the public in the plan because it will require them. Right? Then we had industrial energy, commercial energy. We have a vibrant and large downtown, right? Water and wastewater, solid waste. So that's everything to do with all of our recycling and garbage. And then transportation. So those are all like the literal vehicle miles that are driven through Birmingham. We also made a focus on what are the actual city of Birmingham's emissions. And so employee commute was a really poignant and interesting one. Most people who work for the city of Birmingham can't afford to live in Birmingham, which is in and of itself a call to action, right, on many fronts. But a significant part of the city's emissions were those vehicle miles. The vehicle fleet for the park services, for the golf courses, for the parking enforcement, for the fire, for police. Streetlights and traffic signals, always running. And then buildings and facilities, right? We all operate a historic and extremely energy inefficient but very beautiful city hall, right? So this gives you your starting point. We also did an assessment of climate risks and vulnerabilities. And I will say that I think one of the biggest, if you ask me like what did the board really bring to Birmingham's climate plan, I would say what we brought was a clear request to frame sustainability in a wider lens than just carbon. That this is a commons problem. We are committed to some level of warming. It is happening. And even if Birmingham was climate neutral, the effects of climate change would still affect us. So this also needs to focus on mitigating climate risk, on adaptation, and on kind of a more holistic view of what sustainability and quality of life is. So I would say that was one clear message that our board was able to bring that I felt really influenced where our final product came out. You'll see a lot about stormwater management, right? And managing those first flushes from bigger storms and more intense storms that are coming. And that came out of our board's kind of push, but also what we heard from the public around that resilience piece was a pain point for people already. We have basements flooding, right? And we're not even in like the real bad times yet. And so I would say that's something that we were really able to bring to the table. So there were a number of public source tools that we were able to use to assess, okay, how are we on a vulnerability index from climate change? Well, actually pretty decent, right? What's our community baseline? What's our risk to extreme events? Hey, well, okay, we're not the worst, right? Don't know what's going on in Bloomfield Hills, but like we're doing okay. But helping us understand, what is our risk? And a lot of that has to do with where you are in a watershed. So I felt like that greenhouse gas inventory and climate risk inventory were kind of the starting data collection. The next step that we really focused on was public engagement. So Birmingham and many cities usually have a direct survey tool that they can use to gather feedback from the public. We did that in a couple of ways. So you can see yours truly sitting there at a number of downtown Birmingham events. We did a visioning session with community members, which you can see there on the right, which SEMCOG supported us with. We had 3 different phases of public engagement, 5 in-person events, 3 surveys, and over 1,000 plus people responding. the sustainability board is the choir. Like we are all in, like we want to go for it, right? But understanding where the average Birmingham resident is at was really important because fundamentally something like this is a change management exercise and you can't push people too far, right? We need to understand what is acceptable, what is aggressive enough, but can still realistic and can still happen, right? So really understanding where the public was at was important. And this took a long time. Like this is something where you iterated, you do surveys, use events, you'd wait to get the data, but the data was incredibly important. And so these are some of the snapshots of the results that I found were really important. So, how would you describe your overall level of concern about addressing sustainability and climate action? Over half of Birmingham residents are very concerned, and then another good chunk are somewhat concerned. So, okay, over 75% of us are like, this is on our radar. We thought it was really interesting to ask, like, okay, like what concerns you about sustainability, right? And if you look at that, the thing that got the most votes was water quality, right? So, like, people are concerned about that. People are concerned about the natural environment. People are concerned about air quality. So when we think about framing like climate action in a way that people care about, it's really like the resilience and adaptation stuff that resonated. Extreme weather, right? And so I think that was for us where we were like, okay, yep, we're going to have carbon goals, but we're also going to have impervious surface goals. We're also going to have stormwater retention and avoidance goals. Like we need to deliver on the things that people care about this topic. We were so pleased to see environmental justice pretty high up on the list as well. And so that equity piece you'll see flowing throughout the plan. At what level should Birmingham be in terms of sustainable practices? So 46% wanted us to be a regional leader, and then another 35 said we should increase, right? And then there's 17% of people who said we should not be concerned, but our board looked at that result and said we have a mandate. This is like people want us to lead here, and we don't even have a plan right now, right? And so I think some of this was hugely validating, and this is the kind of information and feedback that when we kept bringing our updates to our city commissioners, to our elected officials, really gave them comfort to support this. Ultimately, this plan was unanimously passed by our city commission. Um, So that was kind of the public engagement piece. I would also say that in most cities, your sustainability work, again, it's cross-sectoral, it's multidisciplinary. Like it touches all kinds of other stuff that's already happening, right? So Birmingham has a 2040 master plan, which focuses on things like upzoning and bike lanes, right? Which obviously having denser housing, there's lots of things that have huge impacts on your carbon footprint, right? We have a multimodal transportation plan that works on, full street connectivity whenever we redo a street. We have our Parks and Rec master plan. A lot of Birmingham's acreage, over 10%, is actually parks and golf courses, right? So the Green Public Climate Plan like wasn't superseding any of those things, but it had to connect into them. And then there's also these county and state level initiatives that we had to ladder up to as well. Michigan's Healthy Climate Plan, Southeast Michigan's Healthy Climate Plan, what our neighbors are doing in Royal Oak and Ann Arbor. So you weren't starting in a vacuum. And a lot of what our board asked our city staff supports to do was benchmark what was happening in other cities and towns, right? Because it's like, let's not reinvent the wheel. I would say there's also a lot of nonprofits and other partners in the region who have done a huge amount in supporting cities and who we wanted to be partners. You can see some of that listed here. Friends of the Rouge was a huge support. We have the river running right through the city. Lots and lots of partners out there who are supporting. So I know that in the invite and in the registration, there was an actual link to our Green Healthy Climate Plan. If you look into that document, it's really well done. City staff did an amazing job, but we must have executed on drafts of that thing for 5 months, right? Going section by section and building. And I would say once we got into the actual guts of drafting that report is when all the individual expertises of the folks on our team really came to bear. These are the sections of the report: executive summary, introduction, what was the process to build the plan, what's that data baseline, right? Our climate risks, our greenhouse gas inventory, and then what are our goals and what we're going to do about it. So this visioning exercise that we went through our community engagement, through all the data we collected was that the Birmingham community will be a regional leader in sustainability and climate action by instituting policies and practices that enhance the natural built environment, improve quality of life, and foster equity and resilience toward a vibrant future. So you'll see pieces that came through there, right? It's not just about greenhouse gas. Climate action is here, but so is resilience, so is equity, so is quality of life. Think about air quality and water quality and all those things that came through, right? So I think this vision is a good example of how the process of having an ad hoc board, of engaging citizens and building out a plan and doing that public engagement strengthened what we actually came out with. I would say there's two major carbon commitments in the plan. One is reducing carbon emissions by 25% by 2035. I wish that number was more aggressive, but I think that number is realistic. And we built our plan assuming zero grid greening. If you look at what the state of Michigan is saying, how the grid is going to green, we would achieve this, right? But we know that in the absence of any greening of the grid, there's just like significant public engagement that needs to occur in like retrofitting of homes, and we weren't quite confident we would get there. But we did still make that carbon neutral commitment by 2050. And the first place we start on this is city operations. The plan then has the next sections of our document then do action plans around all of these areas. So we set sub goals and commitments, as well as a clear set of actions on water and stormwater, natural resources, quality of life, city buildings and facilities overall, waste, transportation, and then municipal operations specifically. So I'm going to show an example of the executive summary of one part of the plan. So water and stormwater was one area of the plan. You can see our sub goal for this: increase capacity for the infiltration or capture of an additional 500,000 gallons of stormwater per rain event by 2035. And it took a lot of math to understand like what was needed to like kind of prevent basement flooding and like et cetera, et cetera. And then you can see what are the prioritized actions that are going to happen here. Well, the first is we need a big hydrological and topographical study to understand like what are the pain points, what are the areas where if you invested in bioswales, for example, it would actually have a return in preventing flooding from happening. We need rain gardens. We need a tracking system for stormwater infrastructure, right? There's a whole long list of stuff here. I would say that another area where our board really had a big impact was enforcing some of these criteria to be shown. So, hey, how costly is this? Who's going to own it? Is it a short-term or long-term? Is this simply an enabler that we have to do anything else? Or is this something that's actually going to deliver a carbon benefit and a resilience benefit, right? So making sure that we didn't have just like a laundry list of actions without some understanding of which ones were the most important. So I'll briefly page through each kind of section where we made commitments to say like, okay, what was the goal made? How many actions were there and kind of what's the takeaway? So on water and stormwater, it is about the capacity for infiltration of stormwater. We had 11 different actions, and really they're about decentralizing the responsibility from stormwater mitigation away from our sewer system, which in some cases is combined, in some cases is separated, onto individual properties. On the natural resources side, increasing native and naturalized areas in the city by 470 acres by 2035. 8 different actions there, and lots of connections to quality of life. This is mostly about planting trees and getting to 40% tree cover per parcel. Quality of life side, publishing comprehensive citywide and community level quality of life metrics on equity and sustainability by 2035. And really starting to do some monitoring around air quality. Remember when we had like all those fires last year and like different communities had their own air quality measurement stations? We didn't have one in Birmingham, right? So goals like that. On the building side, again, this is the big daddy from the carbon perspective. It is buildings and facilities. We are focused on GHGs. So we need to reduce 50% by 2035. 10 actions there, but it's really about residential energy and renewables and looking to some extent at geothermal. On the waste side, we need to reduce total landfill solid waste. 10 actions here, both about source reduction, but also for Birmingham with our unique restaurant mix downtown about composting. And we saw huge interest from the community in curbside compost. So something that we're looking closely at. We also need to work closely with SOCRA, our partner on waste, just on data tracking in general. And then another issue that we face is that most cities don't have any data at all on commercial and industrial waste pickup, which is handled directly by landlords and by business owners. Really, they only have the municipal pickup data. So some actions here are simply like, okay, we need to start measuring or making assumptions to estimate certain things, right? So sometimes it's like you want to jump straight into action, and it's like, well, and we don't even know if we're underestimating the problem here. So a lot of good learnings there. On the transportation side, we need to reduce GHG emissions from passenger vehicles 15% by 2035. So 8 actions there, starting with a redo of our own multimodal transportation plan, including comprehensive bike infrastructure in Birmingham, which is an area where my personal opinion is that we are behind first neighboring communities. If Birmingham can't do this with our walkability and infrastructure, I don't think any other community in southeastern Michigan can, right? So this is an area we want to lead, but we also have Woodward running through, and a lot of our vehicle miles come there. So a lot of recommendations around road dieting on Woodward, on Adams, and the road diet on Adams was actually recently completed. On Adams in Birmingham, they have now narrowed the road. And then municipal operations. So institutionalizing carbon reduction and climate resilience by 2035. So 13 actions there. And that's really about walking the walk. If you want to know exactly what we said we were going to do in each of those, open up the plan in that link, which I'll also drop into chat. We also tried to, have parts of the plan that were like, what can I do if I'm an individual? What can I do if I'm a business owner, right? So trying to make it actionable for folks, not just a document that only other city planners would read. In terms of implementation, the City Commission unanimously adopted the plan that we recommended in 2024. And one of the first recommendations in the board was to seat a permanent sustainability board to oversee implementation of the plan, which occurred, and 7 of the 9 of us came back to serve on that board. We will do annual reporting. We will refresh our GHG inventory every 3 years. And a lot of our goals and commitments start around 2030 and around 2035, right? So we will quickly know if we are on track or not. And one of the things that the board insisted on, again, that I felt like was an area where we added value in supporting city staff, was being very clear about the phasing of all these different actions. Like, which ones are the most important ones? Like, which ones need to happen first? Show me the Gantt chart. So if I'm on the board, I can hold accountability to what's happening or not. Right. And so you can see here that prioritization. So top of the list, create by ordinance our environmental sustainability committee to oversee this issue. Hire a full-time sustainability staff person. We've got that person in place. Hire a stormwater specialist. Still a journey. We don't have that person yet. Do that hydrology and topography study. Get residential rain gardens going. Comprehensive public engagement plan, right? When we're looking at that, where our emissions are, it's going to involve engaging households. Start working on energy efficiency programs in home. Create a sustainability fund for multiple city departments. We've actually accelerated that action. It's already complete, and we're going to start funding it from our parking reserve, which is awesome. We're going to develop that tracking system for green stormwater infrastructure. We're going to update the multimodal plan, right? We're already working actually on the city ordinance to require stormwater retention and infiltration on new single-family constructions. That's actually been pulled forward. Study waste outside of the municipal program, right? Like, we need to get that data going. Composting in the next 2 to 3 years, right? So you can see kind of what are the priorities here. And we're starting to get down to, expand ordinances around photovoltaics, air quality monitoring in City Hall. But this is the rubber hits the road, right? This is where you go from, hey, we got a nice document, to what are we doing? And I was really pleased that in the 6 months that I was on the board after we became permanent and started overseeing implementation, I would say that we are tracking ahead on the number of these things. And again, that comes down to our elected officials caring about this and passionate folks within our planning department and City Hall caring about this as well. So that's kind of what the Birmingham journey was. And when I was so very sad to have to step back when my husband was elected, but obviously him being on the commission is very useful as an advocate for sustainability. And we found that in his campaign, this was an issue that resonated with folks and they really cared about, right? So I've mentioned some of these takeaways throughout, but when I think about, what I learned from this experience is that, first of all, don't think like, oh, maybe I'm not the most qualified person for that board. There's open board seats everywhere. Like, if you care and are going to read the packet, you're ready to go. And you will add value, and you know more than you think. It helps to have champions and sponsors. We've talked a lot about that. You get out what you put in. If you don't read the packet, if you're not willing to do a little bit of legwork, like city staff does the work, right? They drafted that report, they formatted it, right? But our board, I feel, and I'm very proud of, did shape the vision of that report. And is meaningfully overseeing its implementation. And that's because people care and are locked in. Now, city staff do kind of know what they want to do, though. So if there is something that you really want to happen as a board, you need to repeat, 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 and be steady if you have a strong conviction. And you can always go Robert's Rules of Order on folks, right? You can always call for a motion to actually instruct, right? And so I felt like for us, it was that focus on widening to resilience where, we got loud about that. And eventually, even though it was more work and to make the plan more holistic and about more things than just carbon, everyone agreed that that was the right thing to do, right? But we had to push. I've mentioned some of these, but I felt like our board really added value in that reframing on resilience, having the actions laid out really clearly, having them assessed on criteria, having those immediate action steps, and really like literally saying, okay, tell us what you're planning to do all these things so we know if we're on track or off track, right? Because eventually it becomes about overseeing action. Who leads a board does matter. Having the chair be your most tangent loving chatty person like probably isn't the best, right? When you're in a board chair position, which I was lucky to learn about through this, setting up the meetings so that all voices are heard is not super easy, right? And I learned a lot about doing that. I think the other thing I learned is that, for those of us who've worked in sustainability for a long time or have some like training in like systems design and thinking and change, like you might read that report and say it's nowhere near enough. And I would understand that, but it will never be enough, right? And so we can't let that stop us from starting and from doing something. And I've been so heartened by the actions we are checking off the list. Even if we don't get to all those goals we set, like we're going to get somewhere, right? And think sometimes in sustainability, it can feel so overwhelming, just like the scope of change that would have to occur to like really solve some of these problems. And every once in a while, we would have someone show up and just be like, I don't think this is enough. And I'd be like, I agree. This is where we feel we can get buy-in from our elected officials and still make progress. And I guess my closing word would be like, if you're wondering what you can do for your country in these like really fraught and scary times and how you can get involved, um, joining a city board is a super concrete first step. Like democracy happens at the local level. Like many policies will meaningfully affect your life happen here. Our elections happen here, right? So I think that joining a city board is a very concrete thing you can do to say yes to democracy in these times, to obviously, as we all care about, say yes to sustainability. So that's what I have, and I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. I do have one quick question, and that's about building codes. I don't know how much impact a city has on building codes. I live in Bloomfield Township, just a mile away, and they're building these giant houses. I know they have 10-foot basements. There's nary a solar panel in sight, and it's why is this allowed, in our
Yeah,
when
so
we know what's happening? How do we fix
So,
that?
so there are some elements of building codes that come from the state, but then there are many that are influenced by local city ordinances. And so a lot of like the super boring sausage making that I didn't think were going to be the goals in our plan were like update city ordinances so that when a new build happens, they have to mitigate and capture their rainwater. Update city ordinances to, and so there's a lot of that work that we're doing right now where cities can make a difference. Most cities have requirements about like how big a building can be, right, on a property line, what level of tree canopy that you need to have, things like that. It's interesting because Kevin got asked a lot in his election about what you might call these Bigfoot houses, right? And I feel like at the end of the day, there is this fine line with like, look, we have property rights, and like as long as it's up within code and ordinance, people can build what they want, right? And so I think that it's like a tough question. I think a lot of like there are some cities that have like clear design standards for kind of like the aesthetics of buildings. Most cities in Southeast Michigan have not gone in that direction. But, I think that is something that's an option. But I think that in the Clean Healthy Climate Plan, like our goal was not to really control what was built, but to make sure that rainwater was mitigated coming off of it, that there was at least 40% tree cover on the parcel, and that there was pervious or permeable surface.
Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, yes. How much does the city have to coordinate with the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan? Is there, I've heard people say, or some city council member, well, isn't this something that the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan does? And as though we don't have to do anything because they're going to do it for us. But where and what do you have to coordinate with that plan?
I think that we nested our goals to make sure that we would meet the goals met there, right? So like if we're talking about 50% reduction in emissions by, 25 carbon neutral by, or by 35 carbon neutral by 2050, like that ladders us up to meet the goals in the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. But like absolutely no one is coming to do that work for us, right? So that is a roadmap. It shows where the hunting grounds are. It helps, but ultimately each municipality needs to figure out how they are going to advance toward that. And I think at the end of the day, it will take significant direct public engagement around energy efficiency in homes. And the grid will help, right? It should help the investments that are being made in greening the grid. But one of the first things that we authored was actually our community engagement plan. Which of all those actions we laid out require community engagement? When is that happening? How much time then do we need to budget in advance of those actions for community engagement? And so I think that was another area where our board made a lot of difference in what we were recommending was this clear focus on like this plan will fail if business stakeholders and residents are not engaged in a different way than most cities engage their staff. And so I can also put into the chat a link to the draft of the Birmingham sustainability like direct engagement plan. But yeah, no, every city has got to build their own plan that is a Russian doll inside the wider state plan.
Mary, go ahead.
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much for this talk. It's super interesting. I guess I've never considered being part of a city board, but we'll start thinking about it. I guess my question is around the budget. I mean, it sounds like the city has dedicated a certain amount of funding to be able to support all your initiatives, but yeah, was that a hurdle at all to overcome having enough funding to actually carry out all the activities you're recommending?
Yeah. In most cases, there's no funding, right? And in most cases, the conversation gets real when you're actually like, and this will cost money, right? And so I think that the way we thought about that was there is significant, or was, and to some cases still is at the state level, significant grant funding available. So like a lot of these watershed studies we're going to do, a lot of the work we did to actually do the greenhouse gas inventory, there was grant funding to cover some of that work occurring. There still are a number of grants that we can apply for. We were thoughtful about creating a sustainability fund that would have seed funding from the city budget every year, but then, tried to go full power broker to figure out, where is the money, right? And in Birmingham, the money is in the parking decks. When people come from out of the city to park here and have fun in our downtown, right? Which directly contributes to our transportation related emissions, right? So we are very close to getting alignment to have like a very tiny fee that's put on the parking that flows into a sustainability fund that then can be used to hire like the stormwater specialist who will help people when their basements flood and things like that. So there's also then like a series of investments like this that like, for example, buying electric leaf blowers and stuff for the parks department where like there is some sort of ROI and payback over time. It's just a different time horizon on which the city would like usually assess making investments like that. So there is a section in the plan that does talk about funding and like all these different ways to go about it, but there's no question that that is a pinch point. We've also floated ideas like, should we put like a $2,000 fee when you build a new home that like just goes into the sustainability fund, right? It's probably not going to be a deal breaker for someone building, a $3 million home in Birmingham, but we've thrown around ideas like that, like where is the money and where can we, divert it towards sustainability? But there's not an easy answer.
Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, just following up on Mary's question a little bit. I mean, how do you get from an action line item that says this is $3 signs to there's $100,000 now budgeted in the 26 budget? I mean, did your committee get into twisting arms? Were you meeting with members of city council, or were the planning staff doing a lot of that work?
Planning staff did a lot of that work, and the plan itself like didn't have a price tag on it. And honestly, I think that was good at this level because we had unanimous support. Like everyone read that plan and said, "Yeah, that sounds great." Right. And now the plan is approved. And now, whenever we go in the annual budget cycles, which just happened, we said, hey, these are the things we said we were doing this year. They're now built into the budget. Oh, when did we say we were doing that? In the plan you approved. Got it. Right. And so I feel like to some extent, like we all wanted that level of detail in the plan. And I think city staff helped us understand that like there's a moment for that. Like it's not right now, right? Like right now is building something that gets people excited is ambitious enough, but not too ambitious, right? $3 signs instead of the word 100,000 or 400, 4 million or whatever it costs, right? And then you start making decisions from there. But I think a lot of that arm twisting is now what the permanent board is doing as we oversee implementation, is like when the rubber hits the road. Now is the time when a lot of that stuff is starting to happen. Jerry?
Yeah, so you said when the permanent board, when did you join and what was the progression? Did the city decide that they needed a sustainability commission? And then like how did that happen? How did that go about?
So the city declared a climate emergency because one of the commissioners cared about that, and everyone else did too, right? But she was kind of the impetus for it. And then one of the actions that came out of that was doing a greenhouse gas inventory and forming an ad hoc board that would oversee the creation of a sustainability plan. And at that point, they put out a call for 9 folks, a 9-person ad hoc committee, 7 regular members, 2 alternates, and then a bunch of people just filled. We put in an application, and you came to a city meeting to kind of give your little bio. They could ask you questions if you want, and then they voted on everyone and seated a board. The ad hoc board existed for about a year and a half and to oversee the creation of the plan. One of the recommendations of the plan was to seat a permanent board to then oversee its implementation, which was done. We all reapplied to be on that permanent board, and now that board will continue in perpetuity.
Okay, thank you.
Harper?
Thanks, Jess. This has been very helpful because I've been pushing. I'm in Rochester Hills and I've been kind of making baby steps to try and get something like this there. But the city council will be adamantly opposed. The mayor will be adamantly opposed. So it does sound like your board was, or city council was already supportive. If there was a unanimous vote to support this, and there's already, it sounds like one strong member. Any advice for getting buy-in at a very early level from people who are going to, I guarantee you, be very opposed to this? Is there anything that you learned in your process? Sounds like it's gonna be very different though.
Yeah. I would just think about framing and like what issues people really cared about. Like we were lucky that we started with people who were like a climate emergency, right? But as we talked to citizens, it was more about resilience and preparing and being ready for climate change because we know that some level is going to happen anyway. And so that's tough, right? Because I do think without an ally who's going to lead the creation of the board, but maybe it is, you would frame it more as about like, climate resiliency and understanding our risks and, dollars and cents and people's basements being dry and people's air being good and things like that. That seems to resonate more widely.
Thank
And
you.
also, like, I don't know, just trying to tie it to some, like, not letting any sort of crisis go to waste, right? Like, if there is some sort of big rain event, or if there is, I don't know, like, trying to tie it into things that people do support, right? Because sometimes you can change your vocabulary and all of a sudden people are okay.
Amelia?
Hi, everybody. I'm Amelia Ascari, and this discussion about how you are, managing the the public acceptance of this and the politics around it is truly fascinating. And it's interesting to hear how other people in other cities are navigating it, or municipalities at least. I wanted to identify myself. I teach environmental journalism at the University of Michigan. I'm a member of BUC, and I'm also the coordinator, the director of the Planet Detroit Advisory Board. So one thing I want to correct here is let people know that even though I registered for this, I'm not going to be a Sierra Club member and I can't make any donations. I want to get off those mailing lists because there's an ethical conflict for me. But I want to say that if anybody is interested, I think there are trend stories, interesting trend stories that you have been discussing here. And if anybody is interested in pursuing that, I encourage you to contact Planet Detroit, or if you prefer, you can talk to me, and I'll pass it along. And I also want to say a word about transparency in government and the fact that we are here on this digital platform. And I wanted to ask how Birmingham is approaching digital recording of meetings, even at this commission level. As a journalist, I understand that like some of the most important work goes on in these ad hoc commissions that are then forming plans, working closely with staff. And by the time it gets to a city council, a lot of decisions have been made and it's likely, more likely to move forward. So I am advocating for more recording of more meetings and more, access by the public and by journalists to those recordings.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Amelia. And we need to chat about this. I knew you were a journalist. I didn't know you worked on environmental sustainability journalism, which is amazing. Birmingham took both the Michigan Open Meetings Act as well as recording insanely seriously. So every single meeting took place in City Hall and was recorded and transcribed. So if you want to go back and watch every boring minute of every meeting we had, it is there. All the packets are also there, and all the minutes, which were transcribed, are also there. So I'll actually drop into chat the link that has all of our like packets and agendas and members. And then I don't actually see the recordings here. I think we have like a Vimeo page or someplace that has every single recording. But as Kevin, my husband, has become a city commissioner, he will often, if there's like some hot topic coming up, he will figure out whichever board kind of that discussion was like happening and percolating in, and like before the city commission meeting he'll go like listen in at like 1.5 speed to like, okay, like let me see what that fight was actually about in that board meeting. But like Birmingham has, like, I was impressed and taken aback by the level of commitment to recording things.
That's superb. We should use it as a statewide example then.
Yeah.
Mary Jo.
Yeah, I'm impressed by that too. I was just going to say, in Dearborn, I'm lucky to see even some minutes. Even when they have minutes, they're long, overdue. And environmental, I think they call it the environmental commission. It just started, but I think they're only meeting quarterly. But they do have a city contact right on the website, which not all the commissions do. But I wanted to ask, I mean, does the commission do anything other than overlooking the plan? I mean, do you know,
Yeah,
have
sometimes.
any new ideas? Because I wondered how the commission works. Yeah.
Yeah, the committee does. Sometimes the city commission will kick like ad hoc random things to us where they're like, that sounds sustainability-ish, like let them figure it out. So recently, like, there was a commissioner whose pet issue was like, hey, should we ban, I think 2 or 3 stroke gas leaf blowers and stuff like that? And they're like, that sounds vaguely sustainability-ish. And so they kicked it to us to like draft ordinance language. And so we were like, okay. And so what we've ended up doing is combining, hey, yeah, like let's, go to cleaner equipment, let's phase it in over time, let's have a rebate program. But we're also going to propose all these ordinance changes around allowing native lawns and taking away fining people if their grass is high, right? So like what we'll come back to them with is like, thank you for thinking that was our issue. Like here's all this other systemic stuff that like let's address the root cause of why anyone needs a lawnmower, like in Birmingham at all, right? And so sometimes we would get those like one-off issues where we'd be like, okay, this is a bit of a squirrel, but like, let's turn it into something we care about at the same time. And then like there's specific ordinance language about what each committee does. And our committee also has the ability to have things referred to us from the planning board, which I thought was really important. We have a lot of very large, like commercial and mixed use buildings that are built in Birmingham, right? And so a lot of what we want to do is ensure that in those large developments, there are some considerations to greener building materials, to solar and geothermal and things like that. So the planning committee can also send or refer someone who's trying to get a building built to the sustainability committee as well. It's not happened yet, but I think we can make some good trouble there as well.
But I mean, would a citizen be welcome to come, or a resident be welcome to come to the meetings and say, hey, my neighbor cut down another tree on the weekend?
So they absolutely could. I think that we would say like, thank you. Here's probably where you would report that,
Oh,
right?
I realize that,
Yeah.
but it's an issue.
But
Yeah.
but I would say like we would have the public show up every once in a while, sometimes some Boy Scouts, sometimes some usual suspects about chemtrails and stuff like that. And we'd say thank you, for that guidance. But sometimes we'd have like a local business owner show up who would say like, hey, I have a new potential large office tenant who wants to know what the city's doing on sustainability. And we'd say like, that's awesome. We can meet with them, right? Like that sounds great, right? So people would show up like that. But generally, I would say like the main bulk of the work is overseeing implementation of the activities we already committed to versus adding new ones.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Gary, go ahead.
Okay, my last question. It's about businesses. And one of the city council people said, are we going to be telling businesses what to do? Now, I understand you can change the ordinance for something, but are there other things that you offer to a business to be more green that they can adopt or not adopt?
Yeah. So one of the things that that we would like to offer, for example, our composting, right? That was one that we thought would really affect our business community downtown. Obviously, all of our businesses engage in like contracting their own waste disposal. And so I think that we met with the Birmingham Shopping District, the BSD, and as well as some of the other like business associations that exist downtown to get their feedback on the plan and to understand like treat them as a stakeholder from the beginning, what would be important to you guys, what excites you guys. And it was interesting things we heard. Like a lot of the commercial office like landlords like really wanted to know what we were doing because their tenants cared, right? And we had some folks who were even starting to invest in some of these things. But we engaged the business community from the beginning. Like I personally went with our planning director to present to the shopping district multiple times. And I felt like there was openness there. And then one of the things that we are planning to do is start almost like an ambassadors program where people can like we'll spotlight who's leading, right? Let them and like support them in launching their own initiatives. And there are a handful of businesses who said they wanted to be leaders on that front. And I think obviously anything we launched around like waste data collection, like it would need folks buy-in, right? So I didn't sense a whole huge amount of backlash, but I think certainly I could see why people would be nervous. We also did a specific public engagement survey of employees of businesses downtown and owners. So we did like public engagement that was focused on that constituency. I
Thank you.
wish we had had a business owner. There was not like a role for a business owner. Because sometimes people can serve on committees who don't live in Birmingham if they like own or work at a business in Birmingham. But we didn't like set up a role. The city didn't think to set up like one of those roles or profiles in what we were looking for the folks on the commission. But I think that would have been helpful in hindsight, and it would have meant that perspective was represented. So like, how do you like design the process so those folks feel like there's something in it for them and they're on the inside?
Andrea, I was just going to ask you to ask your question.
Very nice. Andre, nice to meet you. I'm actually on the Ferndale Environment and Sustainability Board out in Ferndale, so very happy to, listen to what Birmingham is doing. We unfortunately just lost our sustainability manager due to state budget cuts and
Ugh.
just yeah. So that was pretty much our one sole person that was pushing for things. That was that understood like, okay, there's grants out there, there's things that, whichever. So you make me think like how important it really is to have someone in the city who is the driver for that. So that's a pretty interesting point that you make. So my question is, do you work with did Birmingham work with their municipalities, that are kind of surrounding, and was there any like cross meetings or yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think to your point on like our planning director was amazing and like personally cares about this. And like that has made all the difference. We also for a year there was like an intern who was like getting her master's in public planning who was cheap, who was awesome. Like all of the like actual like formatting and graphics of the plan, which are like gorgeous, like she just like showed up and knew how to do that, and we were like, what? So I think you can also like try to get I think there was some creativity around like what human horsepower can we throw at this, but if there's no bandwidth within city staff, it won't happen. And so I think I'm so sorry to hear that Ferndale lost their manager. I think from the beginning, like it was always a bit like the planning department, like it was like a project of love for them, and so like we just got lucky in that. There was a lot of coordination with other local communities. So our planning department reached out to a number of local communities to understand their plans, to benchmark their plans, to understand how their boards worked. I think in particular, we had a lot of communication with Royal Oak. Nick Dupuy, our planning plan director actually lives in Ferndale, so I'm sure he knows whoever is in the department there. And then we had quite some conversation with Ann Arbor as well, who's obviously like a bit of a different context than us. Like community solar is not something we're about to go out and execute, right? But that benchmarking was important again because I would say we're a bit tardy to the party on building a plan, and like there was a lot that already existed that was awesome, right? That it was just a matter of saying, "Yep, that sounds good for us too. Like put that in our plan, please." And I think especially on some of like the transit connectivity and bike infrastructure, like I would say Ferndale is like a leader, right? And so like there was, I think, a lot that we could learn from there.
One one more question. I really liked your outreach to the community because I think like to your point, sometimes you just change your vocabulary and it resonates, certain things will resonate with neighbors. So how did you fund that survey? How did that come by? If you can just kind of talk a little bit about that. And
So
thank you.
Birmingham already like subscribes and has a public engagement platform called Engage Birmingham, which I think is just a branded version of like a survey tool basically, and actually sends out surveys all the time, right? So our planning department knew how to like set up the survey and enter it, and like, it would go out in the standing newsletters that already go out to people who signed up for them, right? So like I'll put the link to Engage Birmingham in the link. But for example, if like the Parks Committee is like has a proposal for a new playground design, like they would put out a survey and like all people in that neighborhood would like dogpile on to like give feedback, right? So it works. Um, and it just so happened that a wonderful woman that some people might know from League of Women Voters named Deb Horner was on our committee and like designed surveys for a living. So I felt like we ended up with like unusually strong public engagement because she like one of the board members actually brought that expertise. But even if we hadn't had like a professional, like our city staff was like conversant enough to kind of know like how that tool worked. And so that was good. And I felt like it didn't cost any extra money, so we didn't have to like hire some third party to go execute a survey.
Jess, I have one more question. What impact, if any, has there been on this project from the federal level changes, the current administration?
And speaking in my capacity as a private citizen, I would say like none. Um, our suburbs in Detroit are increasingly blue places, right? Especially the closer you get to Detroit, right? And I've been like pleased and heartened by what I see um, in terms of like people really caring about these issues. So I don't think we had like a specific role already like in Ferndale that was like had sustainability in the title, right? It's just like a thing our planning department works on. So maybe there's fewer grants available, but I don't think anyone has like stopped the work. We did have a discussion about whether we should remove the word equity from the plan and ultimately decided not to, right? And that plan was still approved unanimously by our commission. And I think what I stay rooted in was that public survey saying that like 90% of people want us to be a leader or at least advancing on this issue. And so that means that this is something that people of all political affiliations care about in Birmingham. And so I think that that's been super heartening. I think to some of the questions that were asked, like rubber meets the road when you actually spend money on some of these things, right? And we're getting into that territory, but we're also trying to be creative about it and getting quick wins at the same time. So I think so far it's full steam ahead, which has been really reassuring.
That's awesome. More questions, Mary Jo? One more?
Just real quick, you mentioned that Engage Birmingham. I think you are the city I heard about, oh, maybe 2 years ago. MSU has their extension service, and one of their goals is to tell elected officials and the public how to engage in civic stuff. Anyway, I think it was your city they mentioned, and it was, kind of a coup. Anyway, it's just to give you a thumbs up.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. No, I think it's effective. Sometimes you do get a bit of selection bias in who fills out certain surveys, right? Because it's often people will fill out a survey about a thing they care about. But that's why I think, we spend a lot of time like standing at the farmers market or at downtown events, right? Like trying to get people who maybe weren't the usual suspects to fill it out. But I did drop the link to Engage Birmingham into the obviously you have to register because you have to live in Birmingham to fill out some of those surveys, but you can see if you click onto the link, like some of the past surveys that have been run from such compelling toppings as naming our street sweepers all the way to, different playground design, all the way to our sustainability, public engagement, all the way to things that have a lot of heat and energy in our community right now, like, the future of next, our senior center. Mm-hmm.
Any more questions? Jess, this has been fantastic. I think everybody enjoyed it. I sure did. And it's being recorded thanks to Ken, and we will post it on our YouTube channel soon.
Awesome. Thank you everyone so much. Please go join a city board. We need you out there.